and welcome to Alexander Hamilton, a rat's perspective.
Many years ago, you know that us rats have been around for a very long time. Well, anyway, back in the day, 1780s or thereabouts, my many-greats-grandfather was a traveling rat with the ye armies of ye United States of America. He was very proud of this fact, and loved to tell the story of how he witnessed all the battles with General Washington as the brave commander. Now, we know that this isn't true, because that old rat joined the army in around 1780, and he came home in 1784, which meant he joined too late to have seen all of Washington's battles. But I digress. Outside of how amazing General Washington was, his favorite story to tell was about this young child, barely a man at the time, who would sit around with the other soldiers and just talk. He was a very opinionated boy and would talk about anything and everything he was asked about. He would talk about his life before he came to the States and also the hardships he had to endure. Because of his open nature and opinionated thoughts, he was quick to make friends, but sometimes even quicker to make enemies. He got into many squabbles, arguments, and fights, and not only when he was in the army, but I'm getting ahead of myself. This kid always had the best stories, and many great grand rat loved to retell his stories to us and tell us about his exploits. This young man's name was Alexander Hamilton. The stories of Alexander have been passed down generation after generation in my family, until it reached you and I today. Now, my many-great-grandpappy rat passed away shortly after he stopped traveling with General Washington. But by that time, he had passed on his many stories of his children. And once they had kids, they all decided to find Hamilton and travel with him wherever he may go. He was such a legend to us, you have to understand. And that, my dear listeners, is how my family became the rats that chronicled Hamilton's life. Now, my family was with him through it all. The whole story is a bit too long to relate in detail right now, but I can give you a kind of shortened version. We watched as he courted for a rich wife, hoping to find someone who he loved, who could also help him on his way financially, if you know what I mean, while also being open to him pursuing his creative endeavors. He found this love in Eliza Schuyler, who was soon to turn into Eliza Hamilton. We watched them have children, 8 in all. His first, a son, Philip, who he adored. We sat behind furniture while he sang to him and told him stories of his father's ventures, and did the same when he had his other 7 children. We stayed up with Hamilton the countless nights he spent writing his essays, pieces for the newspaper, and the Federalist papers. He spent so much of his time writing that when we thought he had been away from his family for too long, we would sometimes run out into the kitchen, or wherever the kids were, and he would scream and jump up, which would bring Hamilton out of his den to be with his family, even if only for a little while. While Eliza and the kids went off on a trip with her father and Hamilton stayed home, we watched as he single-handedly ruined his life. We hurt with Eliza when she found out, and it was a sorrowful day when he wrote the Reynolds pamphlet for all to see what he had done. We cried with the Hamilton household when Philip died too young, at only 19. We hid inside their luggage when they moved to the Grange after his death to deal with the loss. Eliza forgave, and in the 2 years later, we mourned again with Eliza at the loss of her mother, and shortly after, her husband, a few months after which her father died as well. But despite all this death, we also lived to witness Eliza's great accomplishment. Eliza was able to turn her grief into love and inspiration. During this time, she focused on those most important to her, her children, and she cherished them dearly. She was left to pay back Alexander's debt and was forced to sell the Grange, but because of a few benevolent souls, she bought it back for half the price, and again, eventually sold it and bought a new house to live in with her children and their spouses. We beamed with pride as she started the Orphan Asylum Society, defended her husband's legacy, and eventually published his works in the Library of Congress. She also helped to raise money for the Washington Monument, which we knew would have meant so much to our old many-great-grandpappy rat who had adored the president so much. When Eliza was 97, a whole 50 years older than her husband when he died, and us rats had gone through decades of generations, Eliza passed. She had been suffering from short-term memory loss, but she still remembered and saw Alexander in her dreams. She was buried next to her husband and her sister in Trinity Church, near the unmarked grave of her son Philip. We carried on, following the legacy of the Hamiltons, but it was never the same as when we were with those two. And with that, we are brought to today, at least a century of generations of rats later. That story is why we live in this house and not any other. We moved with the Hamiltons, and for some inexplicable reason, over the years, the Hamiltons have been aware of our presence, but have never once set traps or tried to catch us in any other way. And that, my dear listeners, is the story of the Rockefort rat family. If you take nothing else from this story, always remember, rats are better at remembering than humans.
This has been Hamilton from a rat's perspective. Thank you for watching.